I'm Ron Bice. We're in search of whitetail deer with bow and arrow, and information that will enhance our opportunities and ability to successfully hunt the whitetail. In doing so, we'll meet several different people, including Dr. Ken Nordberg. Dr. Nordberg has authored 4 books on the subject of whitetail deer. We'll meet the top whitetail hunter of all time, Miles Keller, who has taken 27 Pope and Young whitetails in his career, and he'll share with us key factors that have led to his success. And we'll meet Jerry Peterson. Jerry is a national seminar speaker on the ways of the whitetail and an expert game caller. He'll demonstrate proper calling techniques that work throughout the entire season. And we'll go on 6 different hunts, each one of which will give us a piece of the puzzle in figuring out the whitetail deer.
The white-tailed deer is the #1 big game animal in the world. Their numbers are on the rise in most every state and offer some true excitement during the fall hunting season. The reason for this is sound management by the Department of Natural Resources, the deer's ability to sustain adversity, and their incredible reproductive capabilities. Each November in the north and December in the south, the rut or mating season takes place. During this time, approximately 90% of the adult doe population will be bred, and in most cases will produce twin fawns. At least 50% of the doe fawns that were born the previous June will also be bred during the rut period, and generally produce only 1 fawn. If a doe doesn't conceive during the initial rut, she will come back into estrus or heat 28 days later and once again be receptive to breeding. Take 7 adult does and 7 fawn does, for example. Under optimum conditions, this doe population could produce as many as 17 fawns the following summer. Variables in this scenario would be the severity of the winter and availability of nutritious food. If a pregnant doe becomes weak from lack of diet, injury, or distress for a long period of time, her body will react in such a way that she will absorb a fetus one at a time, depending on the degree of distress or weakness. This is nature's way of ensuring the adult's survival. Dogs do a lot of damage to deer. Even though a dog has only a slight chance of catching a healthy deer, the amount of energy the deer exhausts from running from the dog is vital. Predation, poaching, and car kills are other factors. Hunting is a crucial part in the management of the whitetail. Properly controlled by the DNR, hunting is a way to keep the herds in check, to prevent overpopulation that ends in disease and starvation. If we didn't control this growth, the herd would grow to a size that would eventually overwhelm its food supply. Sooner or later, before the spring green-up arrives, the animal would exhaust its available browse and food source. With so many deer and no food left to eat, the herd would go through mass starvation and disease. Hunting controls this problem, and a large portion of the money that is generated through the sale of hunting licenses goes back to the management and welfare of the animal itself. The whitetail is thriving and under control. Because of this, we who hunt share in the management program and have the opportunity to pursue the #1 big game animal in the world, the majestic white-tailed deer. Miles Keller is the Senior Bow Hunting Staff Director for XI Archery, and he's taken 27 bucks qualifying for the Pope and Young record book, including this one, the previous Wisconsin state record. Let's join Miles as he shares key tips that have helped him to these accomplishments.
I'd like to share with you a few tips that hopefully will help make your hunt a lot more successful. If I'm going to a new area, I usually like to get a set of aerial photos and topographical maps of the area. The reason I like to do this is I can sit down the evening before I go scouting and get myself familiar with the whole area. Rather than just walking into the woods blind, going from tree to tree, and say I come across a river somewhere or a landmark in there, I don't know how anything ties together. By looking at the aerial photos and topographical maps, I'm in the woods now and I have a mental picture of everything. I come across a river, a ravine, or a swamp, I know how they all lay and how they all correlate, which makes it a lot more valuable to me in my scouting, because now I see rub lines and I got scrapes in the area. I can see how everything ties together, and I can make a lot better choice in my tree stand placement. A lot of hunters also make the mistake of gravitating to all the sign in there. You have rubs and scrapes, you have all the sign, and say, boy, this is where I want to put up my tree stand. And they have to take into consideration the stand is not going to be nearly as valuable to you because you have to be able to get in and you have to be able to get out from that stand. That's got to be a paramount consideration. Irregardless of how much sign and how good it looks, it's going to be worthless to you unless you can get in and out of that stand without being detected. Oftentimes, I believe a hunter likes to overuse his stand. A lot of hunters will use the stand, for example, they'll go and sit on that stand and try to gather the information. As the old saying goes, I'm going to go and sit on my stand and see if it's any good. They use the stand to gather information. The stand is where you shoot and kill your deer. It's not the place for gathering information. So the tendency is to overuse that stand. Another thing that often happens is they leave one valuable piece of information out. They've seen all the sign and everything in the woods, and they want to go and use that stand. They'd be better off a lot of times spend maybe a few days, even if you get into the opening of the season, spend a few days glassing the area. You might be able to find a better place to harvest that buck if you, for example, with glassing an area and some morning you see a buck at pink light crossing a field, and now you know where he's entering the woods. And another thing, before I ever take to the woods, I'm going to make sure that I'm super clean, because nothing will screw up your chances at a big trophy buck more than being winded. I hope these tips have helped you and put the odds in your favor. Good hunting.
It's mid-September, and the hunting season is just getting underway. The bucks have not yet completely broken their ties with other bachelor bucks and are in the early stages of sparring, testing each other in preparation for the upcoming rut. Ron Bice grew up along the Mississippi River Valley between Minnesota and Wisconsin. Here he developed a passion for the outdoors and the white-tailed deer. Ron's hunted for over 20 years with bow and arrow, taking several nice bucks. Today, he's set up to do some early season rattling, hoping to get bucks out of their beds early to investigate the illusion of other bucks in the area. Notice the second buck. Even though party hunting is legal in Minnesota and Ron's hunting partner is in the area, he decides the first buck would satisfy the needs for venison and passes this easy shot. Ron, who is a year-round 3D target shooter, has honed his archery skills to a fine edge. He's made a perfect hit on this buck, and the animal traveled only 15 yards after the shot.
Boy, he's a beautiful buck, isn't it something? I'll tell you what, this beam and arrow and that beam and broadhead, I'm shooting an 80 grain beam and broadhead. As you saw, it went completely through that animal, and that deer died within 15 yards of where I hit it. Just an absolutely awesome setup. I'm shooting an Axon Legend Magnum bow, shooting 67 pounds, and I'm getting 261 feet a second. The deer had no idea what hit it. We were up in that tree stand, we were doing a little rattle and trying to inspire just a little bit of early sparring activity. This buck walked within 10 yards of us and walked out. I had a shot at him, he was about 15 yards away. Absolutely a thing beauty. What you want to do is you want to just rub those horns together just a little bit. It doesn't sound like a couple of bucks are just sitting back here, just kind of fighting and sparring a little bit, and the other bucks want to get up and see what's going on. Works like a charm this time of year. Of course, when you get into the rut, you want to start banging and more just a little bit harder. Pre-rut, just tickle them. Works for them real good.
Dr. Ken Nordberg is the author of the Whitetail Hunter's Almanac 1st through 4th editions and writes a monthly column for Bowhunting World magazine entitled Whitetail Science. Let's join Dr. Nordberg as he shares insight about bachelor groups and the sparring activity of the whitetail.
During summer months, antlered bucks commonly congregate within special feeding areas, and after feeding, return to their separate bedding areas. During this period, you might see anywhere from 5 to 12 bucks in one feeding spot. Generally, they're all the bucks that live within an area of 3/4 to 1.5 square miles in size. About last week in August or the first week in September in this part of the whitetail world, bucks shed velvet. As soon as velvet is shed, each one is anxious to try out his new antlers on other bucks. It's during this next 45-day period that whitetails determine which of them is most dominant, and to the most dominant buck eventually goes the right to breed. Most sparring is very short during this period. Bucks will be feeding close to one another, they'll bump antlers, and a short fight will break out, lasting perhaps 20 to 60 seconds. As September wears on, these battles become more prolonged. Whitetails show more temper, and injuries are not uncommon during that period. By mid-October, each antlered buck within the area has established its place in the pecking order. The most dominant buck of the area is clearly recognized as being the most dangerous brute, and to this buck will go the right to breed.
Here's a hunting tip I think you'll really appreciate. Determining the wind in the area that you're hunting. I used to use a string or a thread on my bow, and if the thread was going this way and I were hunting over here, I'd feel pretty confident I was set up properly. However, even under those circumstances, at times I'd be scented by the animal, and I'd wonder how in the world did that happen. Well, I'll tell you, I did a little research about wind and how it works, and a couple of things that come up. First of all, in the morning with the sunrise, the thermals are going up, and in the evening, the thermals are going down. The wind is also being affected by the lay of the land. For example, if you're hunting in a draw or in a valley, on a ridge top, the wind is being affected by a variety of different things. The thread on your bow is only telling you what's going on right where you're hunting. What about over there? I find that goose down, white baby goose down, is very visible and it floats. It stays in the air a long time. You might watch it and it'll go off for, say, 20 or 30 yards. And all of a sudden you'll see, hey, the thermals over there are actually reacting in such a way that it might even end up on the trail that you're hunting. And if this were the case, you'd probably set up someplace else. Get yourself some goose down, some white baby goose down. It's absolutely the best way to detect the wind and the thermals in the area that you're hunting.
Jerry Peterson is the owner of Woodswise Products in Franklin, Tennessee. He conducts seminars throughout the country and is considered to be an expert at calling many game species. Let's join Jerry on an all-day hunt where he uses several calls to enhance his possibilities. Jerry decides to pass this shot, knowing there are larger bucks in the area. Even with the wind blowing directly at the deer, he is still reacting to the calls. However, his sense of survival will not be overcome by the temptation. Later that afternoon, Jerry spots 2 other deer, including a nice buck. Calling can be a great help to the hunter, but as with all hunting, nothing is guaranteed. Again, with the wind drifting to the deer instead of to the hunter, you will seldom be successful, even with an expert controlling the calls. Now let's join Jerry as he gives us a hands-on demonstration on calling.
You know, one of the questions I'm always asked at hunting seminars around the country is, what's a good basic calling sequence? I always begin every calling sequence, no matter when it is, in the rut, the post-rut, the pre-rut, it doesn't matter. I always begin with the social calls first, then I build into the breeding calls, and last do I get into the aggressive buck grunting and horn rattling. Here's how my sequence usually begins. I start with the doe grunt. Giving 2 to 3 soft grunts. Now I'll wait 5 minutes to allow deer time to react and come into the call. If I don't get a response to that, then I'll try a contact call or 2. Once again, I'll allow 5 minutes for deer to work their way in. If I still haven't gotten a response to those come here type calls, now I'll try some breeding calls, especially the estrus doe bleat. Once again, I'll wait 5 minutes. Now, depending on the time of the season, I might add some soft buck grunts and some light sparring, and then later get into the horn rattling as I mentioned. The point is this: always start with the soft stuff. If you start with the aggressive stuff, you might run deer off that might have come into the easy stuff first. Remember, calls are like a gunshot. If you make the wrong one, once you pull the trigger, you can't take it back.
The food whitetails relish above all others is the white oak acorn. In fact, when white oak acorns begin raining down from parent trees in the fall, whitetails commonly abandon normal bedding and feeding areas and even their home ranges, and they'll remain in the area where they're finding abundant white oak acorns for periods of 1 to 2 weeks. Early season bow hunters commonly complain about deer disappearing from normal areas in the fall, and this is usually the reason. White oaks provide a great deal of nutrition, possibly more than any other food that they normally consume. Thing is, there are lots of different kinds of oaks. There's most other oaks are not relished as highly as the white oak. In fact, red oaks are commonly ignored by whitetails, except perhaps in the winter when they're short of food. So it's important to be able to tell the difference between various kinds of oaks. The white oak has a leaf with rounded lobes. Now, bur oaks also have leaves with rounded lobes, but white oak acorns have shallow cups rather than deep cups. The bur oak acorn just barely sticks out of that rough cup, and the white oak acorn sticks a long way out, so that's one way you tell the difference. The red oak acorn has a shallow cup also, but the shell is quite hard and it's kind of reddish in color with stripes on it. So when you hunt oaks, look for those rounded leaves, rounded ends on the leaves, and acorns with shallow cups. And when those are abundant, you can bet that you found a super place for a tree stand for bowhine whitetail.
Leonard Horban is from central Wisconsin. He's hunted throughout the United States, including Alaska as well as Canada, taking caribou, black bear, and deer. Leonard grew up in an area where deer hunting is a family tradition, and when the annual gun season arrives, the woods fill with blaze orange hunters full of anticipation. Leonard took up bow hunting to get away from the crowds and to add an extra challenge to his hunting adventures. Today, he set up on trails paralleling an adjacent cornfield. The season is well underway, and the hunting pressure has kept the deer from entering the corn until after dark. His plan is to intercept the deer earlier as they travel the paralleling trails. Leonard's stand is about 100 yards from the field edge. Now let's join Leonard as his plan comes together. This buck has held his ground for 45 minutes, testing Leonard's patience. If you don't witness your deer go down and don't have an opportunity to watch it and confirm the deer has been dispatched, wait at least 30 minutes before taking up the trail. That way, the deer won't know that he's being hunted and will travel only a short distance, making the recovery a lot easier.
Nice buck, really nice buck. It was a 150, 165 pound deer. It's symmetrical in a rack. Actually, it's not a bad sized rack for central Wisconsin here where there's a lot of hunting pressure. The way I took this buck was hunting along the edge of a cornfield. And the deer don't come out to the cornfield until right at dusk. But along the cornfield there's usually some paralleling trails, and if you can find those trails, set your tree stand in 100, 150 yards from the edge of the field. You usually get an opportunity to take an animal such as this earlier in the day. By moving my stand in, it gave me an opportunity to take this buck with enough light left. It worked for me, it worked for you.
Now, this is a project well worth considering on any hunting property. The managers of this particular property selected this site because it's on a ridge and it doesn't grow good timber. What they did was they came in with their chainsaws and cut off the trees right at about 3 or 4 feet. This helps the trees sprout down at the bottom. Also, though, what it does is it opens the canopy up. This allows sunlight in, allows the brush to grow in, allows grass to grow in. Not only does that create browse and habitat for game species, but it also creates new habitat for non-game species as well. What that does is it adds a whole new ecosystem right here in the middle of a property that was really a wasteland. This is a project that has worked in this place. It's a project you should consider on your property too.
Nowadays, we whitetails are vulnerable to a relatively new disease called Lyme disease. It's not a fatal disease, but if you get the disease, you're going to be miserable. It's something we want to avoid if at all possible. The white-tailed deer and the white-footed mouse are primary hosts of this disease, and it's transferred to humans by the deer tick, which is a small tick about the size of the head of a common pin. Generally, we can avoid this disease by using various insect or tick repellents, tick repellents containing permafin, or insect repellents containing at least 30% DEET. And at the end of each day, if you check your clothing and your skin very carefully, you can very easily avoid the disease. Generally, the tick has to be attached to your skin for a period of 12 to 24 hours before you can get the disease. If you find a tick attached to your skin, by using a tweezers and grasping it close to the head and pulling steadily but gently, you can safely remove the tick. Not all ticks carry the Lyme disease organism. About 10% in the upper Midwest carry the disease, and about up to 65% in various areas in the northeastern part of the United States carry the disease. If you find a tick attached to your skin, after removing it, save it, put it into a box or a container, and note the date which you found it. You might check with your physician at this point and tell them you've been bitten. Some physicians will initiate antibiotic therapy right away using tetracycline, and some will say simply wait for 3 to 33 days to see if you get any symptoms. There is a blood test for the disease, but it is not 100% reliable. Early symptoms include fatigue, flu-like symptoms, drowsiness, dizziness, stiffness of the neck, achy joints, especially the knees, and a rash. Now, about 20% of those who are infected with the disease will not get a rash. The most common type of rash is a bullseye rash. It's sort of a circle rash that's clear in the center. You might get patches of rash on various parts of your body, or your entire body might get the rash, but the rash is not 100%. At any rate, you need to be preventive as far as ticks are concerned. Another thing we need to be preventative about is field dressing whitetails. The disease can be transferred via blood. If the deer is infected and you cut your finger while field dressing it, you can get the disease. So it's important to be careful nowadays when field dressing a deer.
Whitetails can live up to 13 years under optimum conditions, with the average deer harvested at only 1.5. An average doe will have a dressed weight of around 115 pounds and a buck around 145, with a large doe in excess of 140 pounds and the buck over 200. Animals of the north are generally larger than those of the south. Fawns are born in June. They spend the first couple of months in secluded thickets where they'll have the safety of good cover. Around the 1st of August, the doe will bring them to feeding areas frequented by other deer. The antlers sprout in early May. During this time, the velvet-covered antler is very tender. Bucks prefer spending time in less thick areas to protect the vulnerable tissue from damage. Other times of the year, they enjoy the security of some of the thickest cover available. During the summer, the bucks congregate in feeding areas where the pecking order is established. Around the first week of September, the antler is fully developed and the velvet is shed. At this time, bucks begin making rubs on trees and shortly thereafter begin making ground scrapes. These pawings on the ground, usually under an overhanging branch, work as a calling card for receptive does. The buck will urinate on these scrapes and work the overhanging branches, leaving his scent. When a doe is in heat, she will come to these magnets and leave her scent for the buck to find. This occurs during early November, and it is during this period the buck is most vulnerable. He will travel throughout the entire day in search of a receptive doe. It's a good time to spend all day on stand, waiting for one of these traveling bucks.
You know, one of the biggest things you're going to have to overcome when hunting white-tailed deer is the whitetail's keen sense of smell. It's been said that whitetail can smell 1,000 times better than we can. Keeping that in mind, you're going to want to keep human scent down as much as possible. I wash all of my clothing in a scent-free soap, both inner and outer clothing. I store the clothing in a plastic bag to keep it from absorbing odors from the house or the vehicle. Once at the hunting site, I'll spray myself down with Scent Shield as an added precaution for human scent. No matter how successful you've been in the past, by watching your human scent, you'll be that much more successful in the future.
Ron Cormier is from Maplewood, Minnesota, where he manages the archery department of a major sporting goods store. He's taken 10 bucks in the last 10 years that surpassed the Pope and Young Club minimums for whitetail, a feat only a handful of hunters have accomplished. With the aftermath of the worst storm in Minnesota history, which dumped 28.5 inches of snow on Halloween night, the rut has slowed considerably. It's now mid-November, and Ron is set up between two major bedding areas in hopes of picking up a nice buck traveling to and from, checking for receptive does. Let's sit back and watch as the action unfolds. This shot is conclusive evidence of how deadly the combination of bow, arrow, and a razor-sharp broadhead truly are.
Boy, he's a nice buck. It's not that buck we seen earlier, but he's nice. The way we're set up here is we've got a strip of woods that's about 400 yards long. It's about 150 yards across. To our east here, we have a huge pasture. And to our west, we have another huge pasture on the upper plateau. The deer are using this as a natural crossing area. We've got a thick area to our south. We've got a thick area to our north. The deer are using those for bedding. What's happening is during this rut period, these bucks are traveling to and from these bedding areas looking for receptive does. If you can find a spot in your area between two major bedding areas, and you've got some trails that connect it to and from, you can set yourself up for a real good hunt.
You know, when you're looking for a tree stand, there's a couple of things you want to take into consideration. One is the weight of that stand, because you're going to be carrying it in and out of the woods. The other is going to be the ease of installation, say 15 or 20 feet off the ground. I find that the vantage point stand with that pin mounting system is as good as it gets. And the nice thing about the stand is when you're done hunting, you can take that stand off of that pin, you can take the stand with you and leave the pin in the tree. It makes it even easier to put it up the second time. They've got a climber stand too for those trees that are straight up and down. If you're looking for a tree stand, check out Vantage Point. I think you'll like them.
You know, a lot of guys think that you can't call deer in the early season and in this post-rut period once the rut's gone by. But actually, deer are callable on a year-round basis. They have a whole group of sounds that they use as social calls. Two key sounds that you should learn are the maternal doe grunt and the contact call of a doe. This is the doe grunt. You'll notice how much higher in pitch it is than the deep grunts that you make on a reed. This is the very first sound that the fawn learns on the very first day of its life. The doe uses it to call the fawn to it, to nurse it, and to take care of it. That fawn learns on the very first day of its life that that call means come here. And for that reason, you can use that call to call whatever deer are in the area, whether it's bucks, does, or fawns, on a year-round basis. The other call that you should learn is the contact call. This is a lost call. Now, you notice how it rises and falls in pitch? It says, I'm lost. Where is everybody? Come to me. Another social call that's designed to keep the group together. You can use these calls anytime, and you should learn them because they're real effective.
Keith Edberg is the manager of the Compound Doctor Archery Pro Shop in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and is also a member of the XI Archery Advisory Staff. During the past 15 years, since Keith started bow hunting, he's taken 3 Pope and Young whitetails that are eligible for the record book, along with several other respectable animals. With the gun season only a week past, the deer are still very cautious, but with over 20 inches of snow covering the forest floor, it's made it tough to find abundant food. Keith is set up to intercept the deer as they travel from bedding areas to a known feeding spot. Now let's join Keith as he settles in to enjoy a late season hunt. After this buck surveyed the area for over 20 minutes, he decided something wasn't quite right. Keith, having the opportunity to watch his deer go down, realizes it's been dispatched and decides to retrieve his quarry.
Well, here he is. It's a nice little 4-point whitetail. He's not the biggest buck I've ever shot, but he's a trophy in my eyes.
This was one of those perfect times to try a call. It looked like the buck was leaving and that I wouldn't get a shot. So I bleated and then did a couple of soft grunts. Sure enough, he turned and came right in. It doesn't always work, but it sure did the trick this time.
And I tell you what, if you folks out there are taking advantage of this December season, you're missing out on a lot of good action. Sometimes you get a smaller one like this come through, sometimes it's a Pope and Younger. You just never know. But you gotta be out there.
You know, you owe it to that animal to make the best shot you can. If you don't have a shot, don't shoot. If there's brush in the way, if the animal's a little bit further out than you normally would shoot, don't shoot. When I'm sitting in my stand, I've usually got my shooting lanes. I know where these bucks are going to come through. If I see a buck coming and I know he's going to cross through the shooting lane, what I do is I go through a relaxing exercise. I picture myself making the shot. I picture myself slowly drawing the bow. A slow motion. I picture myself making that shot, picking that spot on that deer. And when that animal comes through and he's in my shooting lane, I've made the shot in my head a number of times. It's just a matter of making it one more time. You owe it to the animal, you owe it to the sport, and you owe it to yourself to make the best shot you can. Another important factor to making that perfect shot is having the proper equipment. In order to get that proper equipment, you need to visit your local pro shop. They have experts there that can get you into a bow that fits your shooting style. Whether you're a finger shooter or a release shooter, they've got guys there that can match a bow to your shooting style and arrows to match that bow. Now I'm shooting an XI Legend Magnum bow with beam and arrows and a Sightmaster sight. The reason I have this setup is out of this bow at 74 pounds, these Beam and Hunter arrows are flying at 275 feet per second. What that does for me is it gives me flatter shooting trajectory and more penetrating power. Now the Sightmaster sight is a movable sight system. I can set this sight to shoot the deer exactly where I think he's going to be. If he's a 27-yard shot, I can set this sight at 27 yards. I don't need to gap my pins. By going to your pro shop, you can ensure that the equipment that you have is matched to your shooting. So when that deer does show up, you know that you don't have to worry about your equipment. All you have to do is pick your spot and shoot that animal.
It's recently been acknowledged by a majority of camouflage companies that deer can see UV light. Now UV light is the type of light that you and I might experience under a black light. We normally can't see this light because we have a filter over our eye, and if we didn't, we'd be blind in 30 years or so. Whereas a game animal, such as a deer, maybe under optimum conditions would reach an age of 10 or 12 years of age. Being that deer can see this UV light, what it's doing is they're seeing a reflection off of some of the camouflage that we're wearing. In fact, all the older camouflage that's been enhanced by brighteners and dyes, and even some of the new camouflage that hasn't accepted this fact, is actually glowing like we see ourselves under a black light. If this is the case, then what we have to do is we have to use a product called UV Killer. Now, UV Killer is the only product that I'm aware of that will actually take care of this problem. What it does is you spray it on your clothing, and it doesn't change the appearance to you and I, but what it does do is it dampens the reflective factor of that clothing. If you put your clothing under a black light and you see this bit of a reflection or this glow, then I'd suggest using some UV Killer. I use it, and I can't afford not to.
As you know, for safety reasons, when you climb up into your tree stand, you don't want to be carrying your bow. So you use a hoist rope. Let me show you how I use mine. When I get to the stand, I've got a rope that I leave hanging about 4 feet off the ground. Now the reason for that is, it keeps the bow off the ground when you're climbing up. It keeps twigs out of the wheels, and especially this time of year when there's snow on the ground, it keeps the snow and ice out of the wheels and cables as well. The second thing I do is I tie a loop in the end of that rope about 8 inches long. I simply place the loop under the limb and over the wheel, and now I'm set to go. I climb up in the stand, I haul the bow up after me, and when I get up there, take the weight off of the rope, lift it up off the wheel, and it's free. Now that's the quickest, simplest method I know of to haul your bow up with you without trying to tie knots with cold fingers or gloved hands. Give it a try, I think it'll work for you.
Ron has chosen to set up between 2 cedar groves. It's late December and the temperature is in the upper 20s. With heavy snow cover, the cedars have attracted the attention of many deer as a good food source and bedding area. Ron will get in his stand and sit as motionless as possible. Deer that enter the area will be alert and looking for any sign of danger. The rule of thumb in stand hunting is, if you think you're moving too much, you are, and if you think you're not, you probably still are. Keeping the movement in slow motion will increase your chances of success.
He is a beauty. He is a dandy. Look at that. A late season whitetail buck. After the gun hunters. I'll tell you, that's exciting. We were hunting in a group of cedar trees. Knowing that the deer relish these cedar trees in the winter and the late season, we knew it would be a good place to set up. We went in there and set that stand up a week ago, just so we wouldn't disturb it too badly the day we wanted to hunt it. We had it set up. We saw deer everywhere. We knew we were going to be in on deer. But I'll tell you how we knew. Last spring, I went in and was looking for shed antlers. Found about 5 sheds, and they were all under cedar trees. Not only do they bed under them, but they feed on them. Sometimes they're sitting there feeding on them, and they're knocking their antlers off, trying to grab some of the higher leaves, and they drop their antler. Not only is it fun to find the sheds, but you know that the deer were in there during the winter time, which means that, hey, it's late season. So we set up between these two groups of cedar trees. There's a little saddle, a little corridor, a trail, a good trail, connecting the two different groups of cedars that we were dealing with. We knew it would be just a matter of time. This is the first buck that came by, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't pass this buck up during the early season. This is a beautiful animal. But I'll tell you, when you take an animal like this late season, it gives you a special gratification, because you did something that the gun hunter couldn't do. Every one of them was after this animal. I took this one. You take the next one.